I want to talk to you folks about Real Bout Fatal Fury 2. I'm going to try and make this quick, so I won't go into a long overview like I normally do. I'm mainly addressing people who already know about the Fatal Fury series, and while I always try to back up my opinions with facts instead of shaming, I don't want this video to get too bogged down with minutiae, so I'm just going to talk to you as if you're all familiar with the series already. And honestly, if you aren't, you should go check it out. It's pretty great, and there are worse ways to spend an afternoon or two. It's fortunate that everyone who's interested in the Fatal Fury series can play any of them without stepping on each other's toes or trying to stifle each other for the sake of solidarity or having a main game. That's the nice thing about a dead series. You can do whatever the hell you want. Some series aren't so lucky. Almost every Fatal Fury game has its little niche. The original Fatal Fury game, for example, is one of the best single-player focused fighting games right behind Karateka, the original Street Fighter, Art of Fighting, and the Marvel vs. Capcom 3 series. Fatal Fury 2 and its update Special have their niche as two of the better Street Fighter 2 clones. Fatal Fury 3 was a big spectacle, arguably one of the few games that could truly be called cinematic before that word was driven into the ground, and so on and so forth. But Real Bout 2 is a bit of an odd duck. All the Real Bout games are heavily based on Fatal Fury 3, and while it's occasionally assumed that they are shot across the bow at Capcom's Street Fighter Alpha series, it's more likely that they're all attempts to address Fatal Fury 3's biggest stumbling block, that it was super janky. Not that it was broken or bad, although you're free to make those assessments yourself, but I won't. But that there was such an emphasis on making it the big climax of the series up to that point, that SNK focused on making everything bigger and better, including the moves, which led to a loose, inconsistent system of fighting where stuns were constant or at least easy to get. Juggles were wild, and the character with the most consistent style, who just so happened to be the main character, also ended up being one of the strongest characters in the game just because he could switch up his most useful combos to make sure they hit most of the cast clean. And each Real Bout game kinda differentiates itself by how it handles the act of balancing out Fatal Fury 3, as well as modifying what came before it. In the original Real Bout, SNK threw in ring outs and saw fit to give everyone a little sample of almost every type of tool you could have in a fighting game. Solid anti-airs, juggle starters, pushbacks, etc., but with different ways to apply them, with the emphasis on making the right decision at the right time. So everyone was strong, but in different ways. The key word for Real Bout Special was expansion. The game added new versions of old characters, new moves, new chain combos. It made changes to Real Bout 1 stage gimmicks that made stun combos a proper part of the game, and it overhauled the series' signature gimmick, plane shifting, allowing characters to sway and drag their opponents all over the screen. Characters didn't have every sort of tool to use, but they did have a specific game plan, and they could use the tools that they had to great effect. Everyone was still pretty strong. Real Bout 2 either got rid of or heavily modified most of these changes that I've gone over. Many characters lost moves and got nothing to make up for them, so they were weaker as a result. Other characters had new moves altogether and were neither better or worse. Plane shifting had been modified once again, turned into a high-low-mid mechanic, albeit one where you could react to the action if you paid attention. Backplane hazards were back, as a throwback to Fatal Fury Special, but they saw as much use in Real Bout 2 as their predecessors saw in Special, and the chains that were changed around to exploit those hazards were just left dangling in the air. And the shell around the game, the story and menus and all that stuff, was threadbare to the point where many people feel like the game is actually unfinished. I don't really know about that. I couldn't find any info on it, but that's what people think sometimes. So while Real Bout 1 was an update, and Real Bout Special was an expansion, Real Bout 2 actively took stuff away. And to many people, that can seem like a step back. I know lots of folks think that if you take something away from a game when you make a sequel or an update, it's regressive, no matter how it's done or why. But I think the overall changes that the game made is its strength. Much like how Fatal Fury 3 was one of the rare cinematic games, Real Bout 2 is one of the rare games that is honestly, truly streamlined. It's a more straightforward game overall, and that's a benefit. Special move motions were simplified. Characters can do big damage in most fights. The chains are tighter, less prone to hard links that lead to stun combos, and more useful because they have less awkward fillers or transitional moves overall. Universal game mechanics like recovery, switching sides in midair, and break shots were polished, and for once, the defensive side of the game is almost on par with the offensive side of it. Some might say that plane shift heavy combos put Real Bout Special at the top of the heap, while others might innocently remark that dragging someone from one plane to another just to extend a combo is convoluted for the sake of looking cool. But whichever side you come down on that, as a consequence of that change, and many others, Real Bout 2 is more mix-up and neutral heavy than the earlier games, and that's a strength, even if it is a subjective one. Now, that's not to say that the game doesn't have its own weird quirks, or that it even addressed all of the other stuff from the older games. The characters that are hurting the most, Tong, Chang, Hanfu, they're the ones that made the worst transitions from Real Bout Special to Real Bout 2 and gained the least, and those aren't unrelated facts. In fact, I'm not really sure you could say that anyone strongly improved, other than, say, Blue Mary and maybe Yamazaki. Some moves make no sense visually. Others make no sense from a practical standpoint. Some are terrible at both. And infinites, feint cancel combos, force landings, and recovery punishes are still relevant, and everything except infinites are still strong options in most situations. And that's up to personal preference, but I can see how people might dislike that. But much like Garo after it, Real Bout 2 manages to coalesce all of these things into a playable, enjoyable game, achieving a sort of broken brilliance, even as new glitches and tech continue to pop up over the years. Real Bout 2 may have gone overboard in nerfing or changing a winning game like Real Bout Special, but by cutting away some of the excess, it developed a stronger core for itself. And at least the weaker characters can compete with the stronger characters based on matchup strengths. That's something that a lot of people overlook. I know I didn't really do the game justice, but I just wanted to point out what makes it stand out from a gameplay standpoint. It already has its niche as the last proper Fatal Fury game in arcades, since Garo and Wild Ambition made even more drastic changes in one way or another. But I wanted to show that the graphics and the roster weren't the only things that made this game appealing. Although it is also worth pointing out that this is the only game where Lee Zhang-Fei is as smooth to play with as she is here, and the only game with Rick Stroud, period. So if you're into that, then this is the game for you. And yeah, this is basically just an opinion, a super cold take on things, but I'll tell you one thing more. My take is already leagues ahead of almost everyone else who does this sort of thing, because I'm willing to admit when I'm wrong. Seriously, if you take issue with anything I've said and you say that to me, I'll talk to you like a human being, and I might even change my mind. Actually change my mind, not just say it and then give you a pithy smile that you can't see because I'm looking at a monitor and we're not in the same room. Have you seen the state of essayists today, especially people who write about video games? It's absolutely disgusting. Honestly, I think people should play more Fatal Fury in general. It's fun. Just make sure you chat someone up for matches first, though. Everything except Garo is what the kids call a dead game, and the last thing you want to do is lurk on a netplay client for an hour or more with your controller in your hand. Take it from someone who knows.